2 years ago tomorrow will mark 2 years to the day that Russia invaded Ukraine, and unfortunately the end is still not in sight.
Yesterday, NATO's Secretary General said for the first time that Ukraine has the right to strike Russian military targets outside of Ukraine.
Well, former NATO commander David Leakey is still with us. Also joining us is The Sun's defence editor, Jerome Starkey. Jerome is actually in Kharkiv. Jerome, these comments from Jens Stoltenberg I found extraordinary. Tell us exactly what he said and why it's so significant.
Well, it's the first time that he has effectively endorsed Ukraine's right under international law, under the laws of war, to strike targets in Russia. But effectively, what he's done is symbolically not acknowledge what has already been happening. Ukraine has, we understand, been launching drone strikes which have hit Russia's capital, Moscow. There have been a number of sabotage attacks against airfields and railway lines, very deep sometimes inside Russian territory. But throughout this war, there has been a queasiness, a wariness from many of Ukraine's international allies, particularly from the Americans, perhaps also from the Germans, of their weapons being used to strike what is seen as sovereign Russian soil, the Russian motherland. And that's with good reason. That's because Russian nuclear doctrine might see an attack on its soil as a justification for a massive escalation. And of course, there has always been a tightrope to walk, or at least many people supporting Ukraine believe there's been this tightrope to walk between giving Ukraine the weapons and resources it needs to win this war and to repel Russian forces from its soil without triggering World War III.
And as we look back on the last 2 years, Jerome, I suppose the question is how long does this continue for? How significant was last week's breakthrough for Russia in Avdiivka?
Well, there's no denying the loss of Avdiivka for Ukraine is a huge blow, particularly to their morale. Perhaps not going to make any enormous difference in terms of the speed of movement for either side on the battlefield. It's taken Russia many, many months, many thousands of soldiers' lives, hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles. So what Avdiivka has really shown is the blood price that Russia is willing to pay for every inch of soil that it gains. And Ukraine made a decision that, it was not prepared to lose more troops. It was not prepared to risk those troops being encircled, or huge numbers being encircled. We understand some were lost. It is a blow to Ukraine. It's perhaps the most significant movement on the battlefield since they ceded Bakhmut in May. Of course, the first year of this war was characterized, once the drama of the invasion had faded, actually the first year of the war was characterized by Ukraine's successes. But this second year, the last 12 months, have really been characterized by stagnation and, unfortunately, the failure of Ukraine's counteroffensive last summer to really make any ground. And without that momentum, instead what we've seen is this sort of grinding assault by Russian forces, and that has led to, most recently, Avdiivka, with reports that dozens, scores, some suggestions even hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers being taken prisoner there as the last positions fell.
David, let's bring you in there. Jerome mentioned stagnation. Are we reaching a point of stalemate now when you look at the map of how Russia has had incursion on Ukraine? They're taking more ground. We see fighting around Zaporizhia as well. Where do we stand in terms of how this unravels from here? 2 years on, the front page of the Telegraph saying they're running out of ammunition, and it's the international community is responsible for that. A stalemate?
Yes. There are. I think you need to look at the war at three levels: at the sort of tactical level, and then at the sort of military strategic level, and then at the political level. And at the tactical level, Russia has made, as just been reported very well, has made some advances, and that has knocked Ukraine. So at the military strategic level, Ukraine will be smarting. Russia will take some confidence for that. But at the grand strategic level, or the political strategic level, Ukraine has humiliated Russia. And in some ways, Russia well, not in some ways, quite definitely, Russia has not achieved the political military aims and objectives it set out in this war, and it's very, very unlikely that they will subject or make Ukraine a subject of the Russian Federation, which is what its war aim was at the outset. That is not going to happen because Ukraine is going to be obstinate. One of the reasons that Ukraine's counteroffensive didn't work in the summer was because they didn't have the strength, and Russia had really set up a massive defensive position, which it would have been extremely difficult for any army to break through. And Ukraine will be able to do the same thing if Russia starts mounting an offensive. The second point about the military point is that if Russia really does start making some big gains, I think the West will start upping the pressure, will start allowing, for example, as you just reported, Ukraine to attack targets deeper in Russia. And that will be to try and redress not on the operational tactical battlefield in Ukraine, but to extend the battlefield into Russia, and that will change the dynamic of the war. But here's the issue: how soon will they come to a political negotiation? How soon will Ukraine recognize that actually it's more to their advantage to negotiate and settle for some land loss, at least for now? It'll never be forever in the minds of the Ukrainian, and the same equation for the Russians. But
David,
there is one big issue.
David, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Okay, we are out of time, but really, really interesting points you are making. Also, thank you to the Sun's Jerome Starkey joining us there as well.